Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. We live in the most momentous times since Jesus walked the earth. The fulfillment of the Great Commission is just around the corner, and Jesus directly linked his return to the completion of that task. Our next guest has identified 10 specific clues that point to the long-anticipated return of Messiah happening much sooner than the majority view. He writes, sadly, the church in the West is largely unaware of the remarkable events taking place around us. As a result, we're discouraged by the chaos and decline rather than seeing those things as necessary precursors to the wonderful things soon to come. Instead, we should be joyful and excited even in the midst of the growing chaos we see around us in the world, knowing that our blessed hope is close at hand. Douglas Cobb serves as the managing partner of the Finishing Fund, a partnership of kingdom investors who are giving together to accelerate the completion of the Great Commission. The fund's mission is to see Jesus' command to make disciples of every nation fulfilled by the end of 2022. Since 2018, the fund's partners have invested in more than 40 projects to send missionaries for the first time to over 450 people groups in more than 50 countries. Joining us now to talk about his new book, And Then the End Will Come, the completion of the Great Commission and 9 other biblical clues that Jesus is returning soon, is Douglas Cobb. Doug, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Doug, this vision that you have, this mission to actively participate in funding the Great Commission, that is a part of our program, reaching into 110 nations, countries around the world, to anybody that has a cell phone, anybody that has any device whatsoever that the internet can reach. We're reaching those people through the broadcast medium that we use that goes out to every streaming channel and every streaming service and every social media platform there is. So we share that with you. Our vision at this hour is really a Romans 1:16 vision, which is, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for salvation for all who believe, to the Jew first and then to the Greek. So we're right now 6 p.m. in Jerusalem. So we go from 6 to 9 p.m. Prime time news, prime time TV time in Israel, and then we rebroadcast around the world for 24 hours till we hit prime time in every time zone around the world. So we share that with you. For most, it's been the great omission, not the great commission. All right, it's been to everybody but the Jews and the Muslims. And I applaud what you're doing because it was the Great Commission. It was to all mankind. God so loved the world. And so we've missed a lot of that. Take me back to the early years of your faith journey, and then what was the real motivation, the real catalyst for financing the Great Commission? This is a very unique and specific investment that you've created here that is, to my knowledge, one of the only ones like this. There's many faith-based investments and funds out there, but yours is very specifically missionary-based, getting the word to the uttermost corners of the world.
Exactly. I became a believer as a young adult after college. I met the girl who now is my wife of 40 years, and we went out a couple of times, and then she sent me a Christian Dear John letter. I'm a Christian, you're not. This isn't going to work out. And that was one of many things that stimulated me to begin to explore the faith and led me ultimately to become a believer. Reading Mere Christianity was a big part of that by C.S. Lewis. I'm sure that's true for many of your listeners as well. That book helped me to understand that you could be an intellectual, you could have an intellectual life and be a Christian, that those two things were quite obviously not separate. If that man could believe in Jesus, I certainly could. He's way smarter than me. And, my Christian life has been like many, where God has continued to lead me from one thing to another and has poured out grace and mercy on me, forgiving me and being patient with me through a lot of slow progress on my part, sometimes, 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. One important thing that happened in my life was in 1994, I met a brother named Paul Eshelman. Paul was for many years the leader of the Jesus Film Project inside of Campus Crusade for Christ. He took me to West Africa in 1994. I was like every American Christian, I think, God, I'll do anything you want. Please just don't make me go to Africa. So, of course, the first place he took me was Africa. I've been back there many times. I have ministry interests there and many good friends there. But significantly, that connected me to Paul. And when he left the Jesus Film, he created a ministry called Finishing the Task. And the task is this task that you were speaking about, the task of taking the gospel to every nation on the planet. He involved me with that, got me connected to it. We began to do some personal giving in this direction toward helping to support this effort. And that really led to this idea of a consortium, a partnership of donors who would come together, pool some of our resources, and then on a very targeted basis support ministries that would take the gospel for the first time to people groups that, as far as we know, had never heard it before. When we started that effort in 2018, there were about 1,400 people groups on the list that FTT publishes of the unengaged groups of the world. That list is now down to just 150 or so groups. There are a few more that we know about that need to be engaged that aren't on the list. We've discovered it as we've gone. But my guess is that the actual number is not more than 300 or 400 that are left that there are no disciples in those groups. And this is a big deal, right? Not only did Jesus command his church to go and make disciples of every nation, the word there, ethnos in the Greek, people groups. Not only did he command us, but as you know, Rabbi, all through the Old Testament, this has been God's desire for the nations. His plan has always been to see his gospel, his good news extended to every nation. And so, Jesus wasn't coming up with some new idea when he commanded his disciples to do that. He was instructing them to begin to fulfill what God had already promised for thousands of years to all of the people on earth.
It's a very clear and articulate vision that we share. We have worked over the years to go into the Jewish populations of Ethiopia, to identify even those that remained that were believers in Messiah but were left behind in the Project Solomon airlift because they were believers in Jesus. So as a Jewish believer, you're ostracized by Israel and looking to support those works that established water, digging wells and actually taking care of them. There are the Marranos, which were the forced converted Jews. Marrano in Spanish means pig, and it's in Central and South America. The name like Perez are those who were forced under the Spanish Inquisition to convert or die. And so these are the descendants of those families that converted, or moved to Central and South America, but have a Jewish foundation. So we're in the process of working with ministries that help identify Jewish populations. Like in Kaifeng, China, there is a Jewish community, and getting the gospel to that specific Jewish community using Jewish apologetics and Old Testament. You know, I only need to get to Genesis chapter 5 to preach the gospel, So, it's different. And as you've found in reaching people groups, you have to speak a language in which they understand. It's why many Jewish people don't come to Messiah, because we don't speak Christian. We don't speak church. We don't understand these words. And the hijacking of the words, like born again. Okay, this was a rabbi, Nicodemus, talking to a rabbi, Jesus. Okay, no New Testament, and all of a sudden everybody's a born-again Christian, as if that were a Christian idea when it was a Jewish concept being presented. So you have, the vernacular is very important, and sending in trained people who understand, or developing people in the community. What's fascinating to me is that South Korea has America as the number 3 on their list of nations that need to be evangelized because of the decline in the body in America. So fascinating to me that they're investing in funds to send missionaries to the United States because we're on the decline, and they feel that America needs to be evangelized. So it's really interesting that the flip, if you will.
It's interesting that you mentioned speaking to people in their, in language that they can understand. It reminds me of books I read years ago by Don Richardson, like Eternity in Their Hearts and Peace Child. I don't know if you've read those books, but it's the story of how there are clues and hints in the gospel message that connect to some aspect of culture in a people group that is, being engaged with the gospel, and how that thing becomes the open door through which the gospel can move to that people. So it's a little different than what you're saying about your work among the Jews, but it's a common thing, I think, around the world.
Yeah, very much so. As I mentioned to you and before we went on, that there's 2 words that were so profound to me that are really don't have any sway in the church, and that's the word take away. The church has never known anything other than these words of John, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And they just
blow right past them.
Yeah, no big deal. But the first time I ever heard it, and I heard the words "take away sin," I was riveted by this concept, because of the context of Leviticus 16 is the only place in the Old Testament where sin was taken away. Otherwise, even God didn't take away Adam and Eve's sin, he covered it. So the whole Mosaic system was the covering of sin, and only one time a year could sin be taken away. Now there was this concept of the permanent taking away. This Hebrew ear heard those 2 words. That's what really pierced my spirit and made me riveted by the message of the Lamb on Mount Moriah, the Lamb of the Exodus, and now the person of the Lamb of God. And that was what brought my hand went up. I wanted this because I understood it couldn't happen because the temple had been destroyed. We couldn't make a sacrifice. We didn't have a scapegoat anymore. We didn't have a sacrifice goat. And so it was linguistically very important. It was a trigger for me. And for many that I speak to and have spoken to in the Jewish community, this is a very significant phrase in our theology. So imagine there's many parts. And of course, John in the book of Revelation uses over 500 Old Testament references, and many of them are directly pointed to the refuting of Zeus and Jupiter and Saturn and the Greek gods, the little g's, right? Knowing of all of the pagan cultures and customs and terminology that would awaken in them an understanding of what he was speaking to, that it's not taught that way. The book of Revelation is taught as an end-time eschatological, prophetic return of Messiah, but the wording is very specifically, and there are 500 Old Testament references just in the book of Revelation. So it's a fascinating study about how we've compartmentalized and are stuck in a Western mindset.
You know, I think this is true for Christian believers as well, that they compartmentalize the Old Testament and don't see these amazing linkages between the Old Testament and the gospel. So the one you've mentioned, take away, that's new to me, but as soon as you say it, I say, of course, right? I see it immediately. One that there's a couple of those that show up in the book and in our thinking about this. One is this idea of the nations, where it begins right there with Abraham after the sacrifice, after God has provided. What does he say? Through your offspring, all nations will be blessed. That's the promise. It shows up in Genesis. And then all through the Psalms and the prophets, all the nations you have made will come and worship before you, O Lord. They will bring glory to your name. And, Malachi, my glory will be, it's too small a thing, he says in Isaiah, for you to be my servant, to bring back those in Jacob I've kept. No, I will make you a light to the nations, that my glory may extend to the ends of the earth. And so, as you begin to discover those things, you think, oh my gosh, this is one continuous story showing how God has worked through history. And then you begin to think, well, and we also have hints about what the next few steps in that story are going to be, how that's going to come to fruition. So I love what you're saying. I just think that's right. I wish more, American Christians understood this continuity and integrity of the scriptures, saw Jesus in more places in the Old Testament.
He says, my house will be a house of prayer for all peoples, for all nations. And so when King Solomon dedicated the first temple, people don't realize this is the first intercession that was ever made on behalf of the Gentiles. He said that, and for the nations, for those who are not a part of the house of Israel, right, if they pray to this place, toward this place, right, I ask you to incline your ear to hear their prayer and to answer them, because they know that this is the place that bears your name. And so he interceded. Moses, when Eldad and Medad were, when the 70, the Spirit of the Lord was taken and shared from Moses to the 70, and Eldad and Medad weren't there. They were out prophesying in the camp and healing, and Joshua comes to him and says, they're doing these things, and he said, what, are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all of Israel were prophets, and that the Spirit would be available to everybody for the asking. Well, that prayer was answered in Acts chapter 2, right, when the Spirit came, and it was now available to anyone who put their faith in Messiah for the asking. Just ask him into your heart, and you shall receive it. So it's all foretold. Moses said, one will come after me like me, and you are to follow him. Well, you hear those words, follow me, said to Matthew, and he stops what he's doing. He's a millionaire. He owns the franchise. He was the first franchisee in the history of the Bible.
Right.
And
he's the tax collector franchise, right?
Right. He has guys working for him, right, who are paying him, and he's paying Rome, and it's a whole franchise system. You have Peter, who is much more brilliant and much more savvy a businessman than people give him credit to. He spoke multiple languages. He ran a business. He had employees. He had boats. He had repair center. I mean, he bought and sold and conversed. And Jesus says two words: "Follow me." And what are they thinking? They're thinking that these are the words. This is the one that Moses said we were to follow. No other prophet ever said, "Follow me." So as we look at the general timeline, if you will, for setting the stage for Messiah's return, there are things like the campaign of Armageddon, Ezekiel 38:39, the rise of the armies of the Antichrist, The prophecy in Isaiah, I looked upon one whose garment was stained with blood and asked him what was the meaning of this. And he went on to say that I had to fight them by myself and bring them salvation with my own right hand. Matthew 23:37, 30 through 39, Jesus says, Jerusalem, you're not going to see me again until you cry out, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So the common timeline thinking, okay, is that the Antichrist would come, that there would be some form of restoration of Jewish worship, and that for 3.5 years there would be a period of time of unprecedented peace, the restoration of Jewish worship, and then the abomination of desolation, the declaration that he's God, and the rise of the Antichrist's power, the 10 kingdoms, the 3 that fall away. The common thinking, okay, in that timeline scenario says there's prerequisites in Ezekiel 38. Israel has to be sovereign. Israel has to be at peace with their neighbors. Israel has to have no gates, no bars, no walls, and they have to have so much silver and gold that the world would want to plunder them. As prerequisites for this Gog-Magog, that then will usher in the return of Messiah because Jerusalem's under siege. Mm-hmm. The leadership of Israel is sequestered in some safe location. I believe it's Petra. Okay. They call for his return. Petra's surrounded by the armies of the Antichrist. He defeats them. They fall to their knees. They're at the end. They call for his return. He comes and redeems them and then makes a victory march from Petra, the 200-mile journey from Petra to the Mount of Olives for the fulfillment of Zechariah 14. That's kind of the common scenario thinking among most quote-unquote eschatologists out there. You've taken a much different approach. And, excuse me, your approach is based on these 10 very specific signs, clues that Jesus gave us, right, that were prerequisites for his return.
For all of the things you just described, really, things that will happen to signal that those things are about to happen.
So we see taking place right now, we had the Trump administration recognize the sovereignty of Israel. He also brought peace talks to the table and peace accords were entered into. Then, as God would have it, the Biden administration then comes in and then affiliates with the bad actors, right? Completely. So you have the good actors under the 4 years of Trump. Now you have a new move to all the bad actors. They're all named in this alliance which is forming. And so we see this advancing. We see this progressing, right? That it could break out at any time. And some say, well, there has to be the Psalm 83 war before the war in order for Israel to expand into Genesis 15 borders, which would be considered to be sovereign based on God's definition of sovereignty. So we have kind of a man's definition of what's sovereign and God's definition of what's sovereign, Israel. So take us, we've got about 4 minutes before our break, take us into kind of the setup for what I think in your point is the number one most important clue in all this, and that's what you are engaged in. And then let's start there, and then we'll get to the other piece parts when we come back from break.
It's great. The way this came together in my mind is that as I got more and more involved in the effort to finish the Great Commission and began to understand the promise of Matthew 24:14, where Jesus said, "This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." There's the title of the book. And I realized that really on any one of a number of metrics that you look at, we are racing toward the completion of the Great Commission. Rick Warren, who is now the head of the organization finishing the task, talks about the 3 B's of the Great Commission. And that's not a perfect model, but it's a really good one, very easy to remember. He talks about believers in every people group. He talks about the Bible in every language, and a body of Christ, a church in every place, every neighborhood, village, suburb. Well, you've mentioned already that I believe we are not more than a year or two away from the point where we will think with confidence that there are believers in every people group. We're racing toward that finish line. The Bible translation guys have set 2033 as their year for the Bible in every language, and the folks that are engaged in massive church planting around the world have different dates, different organizations, but one large one, the Global Alliance for Church Multiplication, has a goal of 5 million new churches by the end of 2025. So on any of those metrics, we're not more than a decade or so away from, the completion of that command, go and make disciples of every nation. So to me, the anchor is Jesus said, "I won't come back until you finish this task," and we are racing toward that finish line of finishing that task. The other clues were my effort to say, okay, all right, so that's interesting, but are there other things in the Bible that would likewise indicate that these things could be happening very soon? And the study of those led to the other 9 clues that we talk about.
Very good. We're talking with Douglas Cobb, author of the new book and a bestseller, ranking in 3 specific categories on Amazon. And then the end will come, the completion of the Great Commission and 9 other clues that Jesus is coming soon. It is a unique approach to looking at not going against the grain of eschatology, but adding to this picture a very clear vision of 10 very specific signs that will be fulfilled in a much shorter order than we might otherwise anticipate. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue in this discussion with Doug Cobb. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, host of Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Revealing Prophecy, seen every week on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network. Our daily on-demand programming is available on our Apple and Android apps and on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Android TV. We broadcast live Monday through Friday through our apps, on our website, ignitingnation.com, and on Facebook Live. You can listen daily on our audio platforms on Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, and iHeart. Our lineup of best-selling authors bring you the most in-depth biblical insights into the most pressing issues of our time, including prophecy, Israel, spiritual warfare, and a wide variety of contemporary Christian issues impacting the body of Messiah around the globe. If you missed the live show, you can always catch up on the Igniting Nation YouTube channel. Follow us on social media and join us as we endeavor to heal the nations with the Word of God.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to study right by my side through the Biblical Truth Library. Imagine having access to over 1,000 hours of audio and video teachings available to you through our website on a subscription basis or via our Apple and Android apps on an a la carte basis. Whichever method you choose, we promise to deliver new insights into the living Word of God as seen through the eyes of a Jewish believer. If you hunger and thirst like millions around the world for a deeper walk with God and the revelation of new understanding of the Scriptures, visit ignitinganation.com and click on the Biblical Truth Library or on any device with our free app. Don't let another day go by without receiving your heart's desire for a new depth of understanding into all of God's Word. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Douglas Cobb, author of And Then the End Will Come, the completion of the Great Commission and 9 other clues that Jesus is coming soon. Doug, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be with you.
So, Doug, the Great Commission, the fulfillment of the Great Commission, which is very much a foreteller of what Jesus said was going to happen to bring about his return. And as we look from there, take us through some of these other clues that will give us insight into what makes you think that the timeline is more advanced or more compacted than most have been led to believe.
Yeah, so, in my mind, the way these things came together was starting with the promise of Matthew 24:14 and then beginning to look for other things that the scriptures said would be characteristic of the time before his return, or things that had to be accomplished before that. And you've mentioned a number of things that kind of are post the points that I'm making, but there are, a number of these that I think are really important. So, for instance, one is the regathering of the nation of Israel. Jesus pointed to that in Matthew chapter 24, that the regathering of the fig tree would be a sign of the blossoming of the fig tree would be a sign of his return. The fig tree, as you know, is a symbol for the nation of Israel. We've seen that fulfilled in our lifetime. It's a little enigmatic, but he appears to say that the generation that sees that occur will not pass away until he has come back. People speculate about what a generation is. Some people thought it was 40 years. We've obviously passed that. Some think it's 70 to 80 years, maybe 100, maybe 120. But on any of those bases, we're now 73 years post the formation of the nation. And Jerusalem was recaptured in 73, right? So we're getting close to 50 years following that event. So, whatever you define a generation to be, we're getting farther along in that timeline. So, one of the things we were talking about, the connections between the Old Testament and the New. I had not known until I began to study for this book how ancient the promises of diaspora and regathering were in the scriptures. And they're right there in Deuteronomy chapter 28, the promise of scattering, and then in Deuteronomy 30, the promise of regathering. Those promises are something like 3,500 years old. And, we've seen the fulfillment of the Deuteronomy 30 promises in our lifetime. That is an astounding testimony to the omniscience, the omnipresence of our God, that he can call a shot 3,500 years later and pull it off as if, no big deal. It's not breaking a sweat. He is an amazing God. So that's one. One that I really find fascinating in Daniel chapter 12, that whole chapter, as you know, is about the end times. It's kind of the revelation, if you will, of the Old Testament. And in verses 1 through 4, the angel is explaining to Daniel a number of things that will take place in this time of the end. In verse 4, almost as a throwaway, he says, oh, by the way, people will move here and there, and knowledge will increase. Different translations handle that slightly different ways. And it's easy to read right past that and not even see it when you're studying Daniel. It seems like a kind of an incidental little comment. But could there be two things that would more characterize our time than the incredible increase in the speed of travel and thus travel in our lifetimes, and the increase in the accessibility of knowledge in our lifetimes? Those would almost be the defining characteristics of the day in which we live. And so, that's one that's easy to miss, but I think very strongly characteristic of, speaking of our time, as a fulfillment of that Daniel chapter 12 prophecy.
It's interesting that so many are focused on tribulation, rapture, things that are pieced together as opposed to unequivocally stated. And so when you are a contextualist, a biblicist and a contextualist, you study the Bible in context, and you don't link things that God hasn't linked. Not that it's so much maybe snippet theology, but it's trying to tie together to prove a point or to create a scenario. We do a lot of that in the West. It's not representative of the worldwide global body of Messiah. It's very much a Western doctrine or approach. And when you look at the percentage of the world's population of Christianity, we represent a rather small portion, and are not the necessarily the thought leaders, although we have probably more seminaries and more denominations and all of that. But the 10 that you have identified are clear statements. They are direct quotes. And so they hold more sway than those that are pieced together. Now, granted, when we try to talk about a generation, or we talk about the fullness of the Gentiles, and then all of Israel will be saved. There are things that God tells us but doesn't necessarily define for us, and this is where the study of this comes in, and this is why we have this large panel of theologians and PhDs that we go to who are experts in the intertestamental period or experts in the Greek and Aramaic and some of even the dead languages, because it's very significant in understanding, since we are so ingrained in the English, when the Septuagint is kind of the ruling document, if you will, and even in that, it's a translation into a second language.
Correct.
Which loses something in the translation. And so it's almost become like Strong's Concordance is a chapter in the Bible, and he does a great job with the Greek, but not necessarily would he be the authoritative source for the Hebrew. Mm-hmm. So a lot gets lost in the translation. And in that 400-year intertestamental period, there were many influences going on and many thoughts. And even though the books aren't canonized, the revelations in the book of Enoch, the books of Enoch, and the Maccabees, and these are historical references. And those who put a lot of credence in Josephus, well, this guy was a Jewish guy being paid. He had an agenda to make Rome. A lot of things we can say are probably
money, right?
Exaggerated just a little bit to please the master. There's not a lot of confirming supportive documentation. And then we have the new modern scholars who are the first century Judaism scholars, the Edersheims and the Fruchtenbaums and people who have devoted their lives to looking at it and trying to make sense of it all to get us out of this Greek mindset and put us back into the prophetic nature of the scriptures, all beginning with Genesis 3:15, the seed line of Messiah, and that's the whole linchpin to the whole thing, is that you have to find that line as it winds its way through to fulfillment. When others have read the book, what kind of feedback are you getting from the quote-unquote mainstream the pre-tribulation rapture people?
Prophecy community, sort of.
The prophetic voices that are out there that people are following.
Yeah, intentionally, they were not the audience for the book. I don't have any bone to pick with them. In fact, I follow many of them and enjoy them. One particular one that I have followed for a long time and has been hugely helpful to me is David Reagan from Lamb and Lion. But I have not heard a lot of feedback from that audience yet, because again, we're aiming the book more at the average Christian sitting in the pew. This part of the motivation for me in the book was that in the course of my work with the Finishing Fund, I regularly get to talk to people about the Great Commission, and I find that almost no one understands these things that we've been talking about. That some people understand what nations means, not many. Very few people understand the scope of that task. Very few understand how far we are in that, how close we are to the finish line. And I think that's sad to me, because as I say, you read some of the introduction, that we're living in a time where there's a lot of things to be disappointed, frustrated, and discouraged about. And I think the idea that we may be living in, days that are going to be amazing would be a great encouragement to people. So I'm thankful that, many people who have read it, who are not scholars or not prophecy mavens, have found it to be really encouraging and really uplifting. And I'm thankful for your opinion on it too. I love the way you've characterized it as being a different approach, because that really is, in a sense, what I set out to do with it.
It's really quite interesting that no one knows the day, no one knows the hour. None of us are time setters, and we can't be, because this is something that's to the Father alone. But you and I share a common view in the fact that I have self-described myself. That's redundant. I've described myself as a Y6Ker.
Okay.
That the passage where it says, to the Lord a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day, I have connected to the only other definition of a day, okay, which is in the 14 verses of creation.
Yep.
It's the only other place where a day, the word yom, is defined. So when there is now a second clarification of yom, day, I have contextually the I don't know what you would call it, the academic permission to link the definitions together to find a connection point, because they are both clarifications of the same period of time. One is evening, then morning, okay? That constituted, and that was the definition of a day. Now we have an enhanced definition that does not nullify, but clarifies. So now we have this new clarification of this initial day being 24 hours. Okay. Now we have a new clarifying statement that says, to the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. Yom. It's linked because of it's defining the same word and expanding upon it. So in the Hebrew calendar, this is the year 5781. Based on the Hillel calendar, and that's a technicality, but a rabbi in like 200 AD decided to make up a new calendar, and everybody said, okay, that works for us because it discounts the date of Messiah, and so they all jumped on board. But there's about a 200-year or so period of time missing from it in the timeline in Daniel, which puts us more in the 5900s scenario, which says we're moving closer to that 6,000 year, which would equate to the 6 days of creation. On the seventh day, right, he rested, which would be equivalent to the millennial reign, the 1,000 years. So that's it's not random. Right? It has more added to it to clarify that. So if that's the case, then some who have said that we understand the fig tree blossoming, okay, 1948, okay, do we qualify that by talking about the fullness of the Gentiles being Jerusalem being reunified in 67? Okay. Does that move the timeline out, and so 67 becomes the benchmark? I don't know. I don't know. Is 48 the fig tree, or is 67 the linkage that says we're pushing this up because I'm almost 70, and my mother is 95, and so this generation will not pass away. Well, my father passed away. He didn't see it. He wasn't looking for it. He wasn't a believer, neither is my mother. But those of us who are looking for it are Now, is it the last person of a generation? As Joshua and Caleb were the last two of a generation.
Correct.
And when we look at that example, right, that it could be as few as two.
Yes.
We see two witnesses. We see a couple of other references to two. Could it be that this whole generation can dwindle down to just two and meet the qualifications of this generation not passing away? These are the kind of things that are not clarified, and therefore they leave a great deal of room. And I think that you have taken a very sober view of allowing for the latitude that others have not allowed for, the margin, if you will. They have not allowed for the margin in the analysis of the prophetic timeline. That, yes, it could be that we could argue that Joshua and Caleb were they represented a generation. Okay.
Yeah.
That was, and we don't know the age of the last person who died, who made the crossing, but it was in the 40th year. Okay, that was what had to happen. That generation had to die. So there was one. We have no idea how old he was, who was the last to die before Joshua and Caleb of that same generation. And I don't even remember their ages. I don't even know if they're given.
I think Joshua was 80 when they crossed over. I think it parallels Moses a little bit, 40 and 80.
Okay, but I don't know about Caleb. So I'm sure it's there. It's just not in my remembrance.
Right.
So, but the point is that for those who are used to studying prophecy the way that it's generally approached, yours gives more margin for a broader perspective that allows for comments like I just made, right?
Yeah.
Where others don't take any of that into account.
When we talk about in the book the Y6K idea, it's one of the chapters. I think it's very compelling. We talk a little bit about the Hebrew calendar at a very high level, and the thought that there are errors in it that bring us closer. We look at all of the Western efforts to count back and see when creation was, using the biblical genealogies and history. And, as you know, this is an idea that's been around for a long time, that in both the Jewish and the Christian worlds, that, this 6,000 year history plus 1,000-year Sabbath is a common idea that's been held. I'm intrigued, though, when you bridge from that idea to the prophecy of Hosea 5 and Hosea 6, the end of chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6. That's where things get pretty interesting to me. So, at the end of 5, you have God speaking, for I will be like a lion to Ephraim, like a great lion to Judah. I will tear them to pieces and go away. I will carry them off with no one to rescue them. Then I will return to my lair till they have borne their guilt and seek my face. In their misery, they will earnestly seek me. That sounds like, the passages in Zechariah when the Jews are calling out in that last day for God to come and rescue them. But then in Hosea chapter 6.
Well, Douglas, unfortunately, we are out of time. And
I'm sorry.
I could talk to you about this for hours, because I think you're onto something, and I think that it is presented in a very digestible manner, especially for those that are looking for a little bit more clarity and understanding without all the other doctrines being thrown into the mix, which create a little bit of confusion. So I appreciate it very much. The book again is called "And Then the End Will Come." Douglas Cobb is the author. You can find it on Amazon. It's the completion of the Great Commission, 9 other clues that Jesus is coming soon. Douglas, thank you for writing this. Thank you for the work you're doing in the completion of the Great Commission. And we just pray blessings on you and continued success with the book and the message. And I look forward to meeting you again sometime in the future.
I look forward to that as well. Thank you.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.